Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of the Intrepid Bodies podcast. I am here with my lovely, lovely guest, Gabrielle Smith, to talk about intergenerational trauma and also intergenerational gifts, which is the title of today's episode. Y'all, I cannot tell you enough, how excited I am to have this person here with me. So I will give her the mic and I will allow her to introduce herself.
Hi guys, so I am Gabrielle Dejois Smith and I am the founder and CEO of Lavenglow Organics. So I am a therapist by trade and master of social work, as well as a mindset coach and intuitive, as well as a spiritual practitioner. We do a lot of things over at Lavenglow Organics, but our main focus is black and brown wellness, and helping you heal yourself from the inside out. So we talk all things mental health, emotional health, physical health, spiritual health, because it's all part of the vessel, right? So we just want our community to thrive, and want Black and Indigenous people to thrive. And I found there being such a hole or a lack thereof of being able to disseminate these tools that are relatively easy, simple, like just concepts that I feel like we should be getting in elementary school, but we don't. And they don't get to Black and brown people until we're in dire straits. Like we are in the system or in prison or in, institutionalized, basically, where we get access to therapists who may also be subpar, may also be racist. And, it just doesn't make sense that we don't get the tools beforehand, when we can use them so that we can get out of this trajectory that, institutionalized racism has us on. So that's kind of the mission of Lavenglow, is to bring these tools, bring from different spirituality, different backgrounds, different, therapeutic kind of schools of thought to Black and brown people in an accessible way. So we talk about all different things from like chakra system, Ayurveda, herbalism, mental health, kind of like psychology, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, self-compassion, all that good stuff. So that's just a little bit about what I do, and it seems to be keeping evolving, and I just love it. I really enjoy my work today, and I feel like it's really part of my dharma or my life purpose. So it's fun.
I love it. I mean, can you see why she's the perfect person for this episode? I mean, just the glow and the radiance coming as you talk about what you do. You are in your purpose, and I love it. I'm so happy to see it. Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I mean, I want to kind of leave, even before we even start with the questions, I want to tell people how we met. How do we even know each other?
Yes. Gosh, the divine timing is always perfect with us, honestly.
Every single time, man. Without fail. I love it. I love it.
The fact that, so our meeting, right? And it was literally as I was moving to New Orleans, I was relocating from Los Angeles, and my girlfriend, one of my best girlfriends, brought me to this party that was hosted by Solange. It's an underground.
Shout out to her.
Yes. Thank you, Solange. And it was really wild. I don't know. There was some energy that you just exuded, and it was so beautiful. And we were just drawn to each other on the dance floor and just started dancing together and talking. And it's really funny because you get what happened after that.
Literally, we just connected. On that dance floor, I was I love her vibe. She was I love your vibe. And I think we like exchanged like Snapchat and just kind of kept up with each other. And it was just like, we had made plans to like link up and like never did, but we were always supporting each other. We were like, girl, big up. Oh my God, you look amazing. Oh my God, you're doing great. Go you. And it was just like this, like you said, that energy. I definitely felt a pull and a connection to you that I was like, I'm supposed to know this person. I'm supposed to work with this person. And when we actually had a chance to like sit down for the first time at your house, I was like, this is beyond kismet. She is my absolute sister. And
Yes.
such an amazing talk and beautiful timing. Just like you said, it was an amazing timing.
The wild thing is that it was really years later, right, that we finally linked up in person. And the funniest part of this is that we reconnected in this spiritual shop in New Orleans. Like I was looking for,
oh my God, I was looking
for some sage and like some like other incense to burn, and you know, you were talking to them about herbs, and it was just like, I look over and I was like, wait, Hoda, is that you? And it was really in a time when like my soul needed like certain connections to come back into play. I was actually at like the very, very tip of my first large spiritual awakening. And I don't know if you knew that, but it was like literally like doors opening and getting in touch with just my angels and my guides and stuff at that moment, specifically my ancestors. And it was just a really challenging time period. So it was just wild to see a beautiful, friendly face like across the shop. I was like, wait a second.
So on time. So on time, man. On every single level. I almost let that incident slip my mind, but I'm also glad you brought that specific part of it up, because wow, I am in awe.
it was especially beautiful for me. Like it was just like, okay, like thanks mama, she sent me an angel on earth, you know. So yeah, and then our tea, when we met up and had tea, it was beautiful. Like this beautiful soul brought me a tea that she had made and crafted, and yeah,
we just talked for hours. I just remember talking for hours and literally uncovering so much and just like really seeing the like beauty in your soul. I was just like, wow, like I'm so like grateful that we like ran into each other again, and also that this is kind of like the reconnection of like a beautiful friendship. So yes. And then we're here recording a podcast episode.
Love it. I love it so much.
The universe is on point all the time.
Or you will not miss you, right? Like, that's the thing.
That part. Hey. So we're reaching already. We haven't even gotten into the topic, but let's start. So today we are going to talk about intergenerational trauma. And so before we get into the definition, I want to know a little bit about your own personal framework. So what are your personal definitions, and how do you see intergenerational trauma?
Yeah, so the working theory is that, well, I think it's a little bit of mine, a little bit of kind of what knowledge I've gathered, but I think the understanding of this first off came like in my own like spiritual awakening time period. It was after my mom transitioned, and I was really looking for any and all ways. I was like, nah, like our souls are forever intertwined, and I need to connect with her. So I really dove into like ancestor work. I don't even firstly recall like where that aligned for me or came from, but it was just like, you need to talk to your ancestors. And it led me down this like beautiful rabbit hole, honestly, of spirituality. But I was talking to my dad one day, and it was funny because the analogy came to me from like him talking about sports, and it was like me and a bunch of my guy friends sitting around, and he was just like, you know, sports players seem to be getting injured so much these days, like so quickly for every little thing. And And like a millennial, you know, I took offense to this a little bit, and I was just like, okay, like whatever. But I pondered on it, and so this is the working theory that I came up with, is that yes, like our generation is more sensitive. We are more in tune, right? And sensitivity, what I once thought was a negative thing, which I even think my dad kind of framed for me as a negative thing, because I was always sensitive growing up. I'm a Cancer sun, like it's just my
Water
nature.
sign vibes, water sign vibes, crying in public vibes.
It was just like a light turned on, and it was just like, we're sensitive for a reason. We're sensitive because we're supposed to be in tune with our bodies. We're supposed to get connected back to our bodies and say, hey, like, I'm going to take a break before I am injured for life. Like, I'm going to stop. Like, yeah, it might be a sprain now, but if I keep playing on it in this game, you know, I might be out the game for life, and that's not okay, right? And so the intergenerational trauma, because it also links back to my schooling at USC and my concentration in mental health and social work, is trauma travels 3 generations, right? And so this working theory, my working theory, is that we're not only suffering from our own stuff, the trauma that we pick up in this life from whatever happens to us, whatever, like, you know, BS happens, but we're also dealing with trauma that we haven't actually witnessed with our own eyes, with our own ears, with our own bodies. You know, we've seen it, but from a spiritual body sense, right? From our ancestors. And, you know, we know, especially if you're Black and brown in this country, your ancestors, at least going a certain distance back, have experienced some type of trauma. Like, there's just almost no getting out of it. If they were from this country, or, you know, a lot of people that even were brought here, or, you know, something brought you here. So there's something there, right? With all Black and brown Indigenous people, I really believe there's an element there.
100%.
And so I believe it's why our generation just feels so deeply. I believe it's one of those things where why, you know, we're so depressed. Like, our generation has the highest rates of depression, the highest rates of anxiety, the highest rates of ADHD, like, you know, different mental illnesses. And we're also just deemed so sensitive, right? And the older generation, especially like baby boomers, will say that as a negative thing. Yep. Like, we just don't get the element of hard work. We just don't, like, we don't know what it is to,
we gotta do all this.
Yeah, like we don't stick with things, stuff like that. But you know, I believe that there is a reason and a purpose behind that, and I do think that that's part of our mission. As our generation, every generation has a mission, and I believe that that's ours. So why we have this, you know, depression and anxiety when we're teenagers, and we couldn't, so many of us, right? And we couldn't even tell you, like, we theoretically live a good life. Like, on paper, it makes sense that you should be happy, but you're struggling and you don't know why. You can't place it. And I really believe that that is the intergenerational trauma, that some of that depression was our ancestors that has, you know, never been healed. So it's gone down to us. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's what you're speaking to is so beautifully, and I can definitely echo that too in terms of just like the way that I see intergenerational trauma, and like seeing it, like you said, as like just a result of, like, if you look far back, not even like far back enough, but just a couple generations back, you will be able to see that Black and brown bodies have been victimized in this oppressive state, and this oppressive, like, reality. And so because of that, and as a result of that, like, I even, as you were talking, was thinking about how many of our parents would even say, like, you have a roof over your head, like, I feed you, I give you all these, like, everything you want, you're not missing anything, and at the same time you're not happy. And happiness, of course, doesn't come from just material things, and at the same time it can speak to a deeper emotional turmoil that is a result of some unprocessed grief or unprocessed shame or unprocessed just anything. So
Balance always. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And so I think that that's so important to talk about, and I'm so happy that like your definition encompasses that, and that it's like your theory is, I can't wait to even just see it evolve. It's so beautiful because I definitely agree on so many levels with it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like it just, and I started seeing this in, you know, because it was about probably year and a half to, well, it must have been 2.5 years ago now that this kind of came up to me, and I started seeing bits and pieces of this popping up. And I want to say that now it's you know, it's like we've awoken to this idea of intergenerational trauma, you know, and that we're healing generational wounds. So it's definitely something that I think a light popped on in a lot of us simultaneously, you know. But it's so interesting just being able to do the work under it. And I know we'll probably touch later on this, but it's just like when you talk about the occult and kind of spirituality, like this is shadow work. Like this is the epitome of shadow work when you start going going and diving deep into, wait, what is my generational trauma? Like what is that, and how might have it lended to my current trauma that I've experienced in this life even.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's really wild to see how patterns repeat themselves, and we see that in science, we see that with, you know, trends, but it's so much deeper, right? And so it's really interesting.
It is. It is. Yeah. And I'm glad that you said the science, because I want to talk a little bit about how the science like deconstructs intergenerational trauma. So, like, what are some of the working frameworks that people maybe are already tapping into? And I'm glad that it is like something that's a little bit more normalized. It's something that we're having at the round table talk, and we're linking up to, you know, for brunch to talk about. So I would love to know more about those like working frameworks and how science kind of defines them.
Yeah, so basically, I mentioned earlier, right? Trauma travels 3 generations, and this is something because since trauma has been around, right? Like psychologists like have wanted to understand like what goes on with the body, right? And we know that like the body actually goes through like physical and cellular changes when we experience trauma. But this idea that trauma travels 3 generations, right? If you just picture when you know, a person is pregnant, then they're developing the child in their womb, right? And it's wild, but you know, in female anatomy, the ovaries are created in the womb, right? When I want to say it's like maybe 17 or 22 weeks or so, that you know, and a full term pregnancy is 40 weeks, right? Mama to be here, so I got all the the theories right.
All the facts down. She is prepared.
The ovaries, you know, the eggs, a woman only has, or a person only has all the eggs that they're gonna have through their lifetime when they're born. You know, men or males, like they regenerate their sperm every 60 to 90 days, right? Yeah. But truly for the female anatomy, the fact that you have all the eggs you will ever have when you are born means that your child, your children, whoever procreates from you is literally traveling with you through this life. And not only that, they were technically in their grandmother's stomach, right? They were in, so there's your 3 generations. And while, you know, you as a fetus are being created, you know, your cells are just multiplying, but what are they made out of? They're made out of the blood and, you know, the bone of your grandmother, right? That's where like cells need a culture medium to live. And so that is the blood. And so whatever blood and whatever blood chemistry your grandmother had at the time of creating your mother, That's what the egg was made out of, right? And so this also goes a little bit for men too, when you think of like your father, right? 60 to 90 days at least is whatever trauma, whatever issues they were carrying also goes into you, is made up of half of you. But just the profoundness that 3 generations from your maternal grandmother, right? That's with you. And so whatever trauma, whatever distressing events that your grandmother, your maternal grandmother went through prior to having your parent, then that's with you. And then throughout your mother's whole life until you were born, that is also with you as well, right? Whatever trauma, that's what you carry. So why does this matter is because once again, we have traumas in our very blood and bone and cells, right, that we never saw, that we never experienced. Your people may not have even told you about it, right? Like there's a lot of secrecy, I want to say, in terms of trauma in specifically Black women, women of color, where it's almost like I'm not going to share my pain even with those closest to me. And so, you might never ever know what your grandmother went through, but you carry it. You certainly carry it, and you certainly carry behaviors from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether it's because of shame or fear of retribution, or that's just not what we do, right? You have it. So yeah, it's that piece of it is just very like, oh, I was like, duh, this makes sense. But like thinking about it fundamentally is like, oh, you really have literally that trauma. And we'll go into this a little bit more later, but trauma, if that trauma is never healed, right? Science says 3 generations, and I've also done more research and seen there be like 5 generations, 6 generations, etc. But the thing is, if trauma is not healed, it continues. So if that trauma lives in the cells and continues with behaviors, with all this, it doesn't stop at that 3rd generation. It doesn't die with the person before, with it continues on. And so we are now that generation that's kind of like accumulated generations, I want to say like at least 7 or 8. And when you look back at where that led us, for a lot of Black individuals, that means slavery, that means like genocides, that means like so yeah, it's profound what we're experiencing and dealing with.
Yeah, I think generationally too, it's just like I think that's why our generation is so interested in things like epigenetics, and we're so privy to all of these different topics pertaining to mental and emotional health, because 7 generations is heavy to carry inside of you, as one person. It weighs a lot. And so it just makes me wonder, like, what part of us, tells us that we're the ones to deal with that, to stomach that, like, how do we, I don't want to say like come up with the tools, but I guess like, are there any like markers? I don't know, did we talk about our charts yet? Like, are there any markers in our chart that like signify that we're the ones, like, that affirm that we're the ones that are doing this for a reason?
Because when I was coming up with this, my working theory, my understanding personally, it was just like, we've carried it. So like it's finally hit our generation where we're like, we have to feel it. Like we have to feel it out because it is too heavy at this point.
Like, what I'm saying? Like, we're at the 13, 14 years old being depressed. So we're like, wait a minute, like, what is going on? So
why is the world shook right now? And there's a lot of hormones and stuff, but I really like, our generation has just, we've never seen these kind of levels, and we won't get into Generation Z, but we haven't seen those type of levels of anxiety, depression, and also the willingness to finally name it, right? Because I guarantee that enslaved Africans ripped from their home, taken on a big stinky boat to the Americas, forced to work, having kids ripped from them, husbands ripped from, like I guarantee they were depressed. And they didn't have time. They did not have time to feel that shit, or else they would probably have perished. And I'm sure numbers of us did.
Yeah.
But to be here, that means our ancestors survived and procreated enough so that we could be standing here living a whole different life, right? Yeah. So yeah, like enslaved people were depressed, like yeah, and I'm sure they were anxious as hell, but they didn't have the privilege, right? Which does bring me to like what you were speaking on, is like our generation, right? Like I truly believe it is both our burden and our privilege to live in the time period we do, to have the privilege of being able to have the time to self-actualize, right? Because if you think of like the hierarchy of needs, I want to say it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The base need is shelter, is food, is clothing, right? So you're safe.
Yep.
It goes up to having like different kind of levels of things, socialization, etc. But at the very top is self-actualization. And if you don't have a safe place to live, if you don't know where your next meal's coming from, if you don't have like security, right? And we even talk about we can go into the chakras even, right?
I was gonna say, let's talk about that, because that's all root chakra.
It's the same deal, right? That is why we balance our root chakra first, because if you don't have safety, you can't get to the heavens. You can't self-actualize. You can't, meditate peacefully when you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or if you're going to get shot in the next 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So on that, right? It's our privilege and our burden, because it's heavy. Like the shit is heavy. I'm like, experienced depression, if you've experienced intense anxiety, if you've experienced mental illness, you know that it's not a game. You know that it's not to be taken lightly. It crushes your whole world. It's really heavy. And to be able to navigate through that and still live, life, to still do things, to reach out, to get help, like all those things, that's a big deal, But I'll say, in terms of our charts, right? Our generation is Pluto and Scorpio. And when I kind of connected the dots on this was really funny to me, because I said, oh, we were meant to do this. Like, this is why it's all coming out. This is why, like, we are in the time period. Our period is ripe. This is why there's calls for abolition of all different types of systems that have always been corrupt, but are not and have never really worked well. They worked how they were intended to work, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But they
did their job. They definitely did their job.
Yep. They've incarcerated massive amount of Black and brown people. They've kept us very low vibration, like in a very low vibration, but nonetheless, our people are so strong, we're waking up still. Like, it's not holding us down, but in that, like some of the markers of Pluto and Scorpio, and this is in terms of like your birth chart, if you're not familiar with astrology, which I know you are, girl, but so like I think Pluto and Scorpio goes from like November 1983 to November 1995 babies. Okay, so Pluto is it takes so long for Pluto to revolve that Pluto is one of those generational planets. So there's intensity, right? There's a theme of abandonment in the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which is really interesting, because I'm gonna ask your listeners to kind of consider in what ways they might have felt abandonment in their own lives.
That's exactly what I'm asking myself now. I'm like, now let me think about this, but I'll do shadow work later.
And even if you had, a very nurturing and loving childhood, like with your initial caregivers, like there still seems to be these themes that are similar, right? There's intensity, there's reacting according to our emotions, and being able to also emote and empathize, understand others' emotions, how they might feel. There's a drawnness to activities that involve us emotionally, why I think so many of us are like therapists or moving towards this healing work. Like I'm seeing people that didn't necessarily even go into these fields are like going into these fields and finding this call to be a shaman, just out of their own healing journey, you know.
So fascinating.
We're themes that we're kind of like obsessed with include sex, death, the occult, the mind, right? Like,
Name it.
and we're really like Pluto and Scorpio really brings to light the things that were hidden, right? And once again, we talk about structures, like institutionalized structures that really have not been serving the wider collective, and kind of bringing that to light, bringing to light all of the messiness in there, right? As well as like fighting for human rights. That is also our generation's kind of like drawn, kind of, we're drawn to fighting for human rights. And specifically, this one was interesting, is helping the unconventional become accepted, right? So there's an innovativeness, right? And I've always connected the word innovative to this intergenerational trauma piece, because it's like thinking our generation is the one, we're questioning all these traditions that we've had, whether it be Thanksgiving, 4th of July. Wait, are we free? Are we gonna celebrate this?
Are we?
Does this resonate with my soul? Are the questions that we're finally asking, and we get looked at weird from our parents, or specifically like baby boomers.
Okay, boomer. Sorry for any boomers listening. I really thank you for your listen, but okay, boomer.
There's a question of, but this is how it's always been done, and we're like, yeah, but did it work? Like, did it behoove us? Did it help us? Because we're depressed. Like, what?
Like, did this actually like serve us? Yeah.
So that Pluto and Scorpio generation, we are. Ooh, and once again, we won't get started on Generation Z and their Pluto and Sagittarius, but our generation is what I see awakening so wildly and rampantly, and really doing the questioning and bridging the gap, you know, bridging from the old ways, and we had before technology, when we were playing on the streets as kids, and then also technology and what that means for how we communicate, how we interact. So
yeah, it's amazing. It just seems like our generation really embodies that phoenix energy, that like transmute the old and use those bare bones to build the new. And I'm so inspired by that, but I am also a Scorpio sun, so that might just be the resonance speaking there.
Say my Scorpio bear here, you know, all about like the death and rebirth kind of, you know, just pull for like really just like overhauling things. It's like the Tower card. It's just like tear it down if it didn't work.
If it didn't work, new. Recycle it and let's start again. Yeah.
We're not trying to like rearrange things. We're trying to like burn it down.
Yeah.
We start a lot of times we're in the middle of it, you know.
Yeah. And I think also like it's just, I admire the brevity it takes to do that, because it's also not easy too, you know. And so I also would like to like just kind of speak on how we can, like, so what does it even mean, right? Like to be a change maker, to be on a mission, and understand that as a generation, our duty is to uproot the old frameworks and lay down new, you know. So what does that even mean for our nervous system? And also like, how can we create awareness around like supports, I guess you can say, to do this work so fearlessly?
Ooh, I think it's just innate in us, honestly. I think that there's just a call deep within a lot of us to just do it. It's you know, that being part of our birth chart, it's kind of like we've been given the gusto to do it, even if it's hard. And it is hard, you know, it is challenging. But I think a lot of us are coming to terms with like, well, I don't want to live like this anymore. If I do suffer from anxiety, or if I do suffer from this or that, you know, and I want to make it clear, I'm not using those terms gently. I am talking about anxiety and depression in a very mental health based way, and stating that a lot of us deal with these very real mental health issues. And a lot of us have decided, like, I'm tired of this shit, right? Like, I'm tired and I need to figure out a different way to go about this, because it is draining, it is exhausting. And at the core of a mental illness, when it's diagnosable, means like you can't function normally, you know, in society. You're unable to function at a rate that allows you to keep on living, right? So I really think it's really like our inner call to find out, like, how do I fix this? Like, how do I work with this, you know? And I think that's why it's like we're stating it more. We're more okay with sharing, like, yeah, I'm going to see my therapist today. You know, it is damn near cool to say, like, yeah, I got a therapist. That shit is bomb, right? Like,
I will say the first thing I did at my new job was like read my insurance plan to find out like who I could get as a provider. I read about what a flexible spending account was and how I could get, you know, my physical care even taken care of under my insurance, and my body work taken care of under my insurance. And that was so key because, yeah, like after a certain point, you're just like, I'm tired. And also we're at this place of access, you know, many of our ancestors did not have this level of access. They did not have these tools available to us, you know, like you said, that when they were on these ships, when they were experiencing these wars, these levels of genocide, this like just stripping of identity, there were no tools available. And so I also think about how fortunate we are to like tap into these sort of things. Like my parents grew up on a farm, you know, and I always tell people that like, you know, that's why I love like nature, because like all the stories I grew up with were like my dad telling me how he's like wrestling a goat, and my mom being like, yeah, the chickens woke us up. And I'm like, this is crazy. We live in the modern world. And at the same time, I'm just like, it affords me the opportunity to get I want to say the word vigilant, but I feel like there's a better word, but I'll say vigilant, right? It like allows me to get vigilant, where I'm like, I can't just say that I am experiencing another depressive episode. I have to get curious and want to get curious. And I think a lot of us do have that drive to like get extremely curious about, you know, why is this such a thing for me? Like, why is every time I go to the DMV a trigger for me? Why is every time I watch a scary movie just not it for me, you know? And so these questions can lead us to some beautiful discoveries, and also a beautiful chance to like reweave our stories as well.
Yes, I love that. I also want to say I resonate with the parent thing, because I think my dad like also grew up not quite on a farm, but to like some parts of his childhood where he remembers by like the geese and stuff. And so it's just funny when you were saying like wrestling a goat, and I was like, that's interesting to have that kind of
Always.
But
Always.
So yeah, I feel that. I think that desire and that drive to get curious about like what the freak is going on here. And I'll say it takes so much, like especially because like depressive episodes, so many of us what is the word? It's there's a word for when you have multiple depressive episodes. I think it's like cyclothymia. And it's essentially having several depressive episodes, like you might have like one a year or so. And I feel like what's happening with depression is that it's turning into more of that, where it's a regular thing and it comes up cyclically, right? Whether it's hard transitions that we're going through in life, or different like life stressors can incite an episode. So that's really interesting that you brought that up, because I think even maybe in like DSM, right, it almost brings up the point that back when, or maybe in our parents' generation, my parents are a little older generation, but in that generation, like, you might have been seen as having a depressive episode, and then it might have been like a one and done kind of thing, versus so many of us know depression to be almost a lifelong kind of a thing, or years long.
Yeah.
So that's just interesting, sidebar.
That's
But
fascinating.
the when you're in that episode, right, it takes like all of you to even use your tools sometimes, if you have tools, like, to use. And it takes a lot of you, if that's calling, like, to reach out for help, right? But I do want to bring up, even like, because we're talking about intergenerational trauma, right? And I want to say that obviously why we're talking about mental illnesses is because these things can lend themselves, trauma itself can lend itself to a number of mental illnesses. And honestly, when you see trauma in a working, like a therapist working setting, you often see it be comorbid with other disorders. Okay, so I worked as an eating disorder therapist, and always with eating disorders, there was some other type of disorder or some other type of mental illness that we saw.
Wow.
Whether that be depression, whether that be anxiety, whether that be trauma. And I can't tell you how many times eating disorders are comorbid with trauma and depression.
So much sense. That makes so much
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
That, and the trauma even being an onset to the depressive episodes, or to the eating disorder itself, right? The eating disorder being like a means in which to fix the trauma, or fix the depression, essentially. And it doesn't, but so in terms of trauma, I think it's so interesting to not to make a nod to this, because we haven't particularly like defined trauma, but I really want to do that here, because I think it's important for this talk. So in psychology and social work, we talk about trauma being categorized as an event, like a significant event, that it has significant stressing or disturbing experiences on the individual. We'll talk about big T and little t trauma in psychology. We'll kind of like separate them into categories. And what I mean when I say big T is like exactly that, like trauma with a capitalized T, meaning things like life-threatening illnesses or accidents, okay, natural disasters, living through a hurricane or a tornado, etc., right? Living through a genocide would be a big T trauma. Sexual assault and rape, also big T trauma. Might want to put a trigger warning on this episode.
Yeah, definitely will. Yeah.
Physical abuse, and then like things like death of like a child, I would say I personally would categorize as a big T trauma, because it's one of those things where it doesn't lead like the normal events of like life, right? A parent should never theoretically lose a child. So that being big T trauma. And then little t trauma being things like non-life threatening injuries, or accidents, emotional abuse, right? Being different from physical abuse, but still very like harrowing and pervasive. The death of a pet can be little t trauma. Bullying can be little t trauma. Harassment, right? Just like certain harassment can be little t trauma. And loss of significant relationships, whether that be a grandmother, a mother, a father, like losing your parents, especially at a young age, could be questionable whether it's big or little t trauma. Okay. It essentially trauma being something that drastically alters your life. It does alter your life physically, emotionally, and it spiritually changes you,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
Now the caveat to this of me like distinguishing big T and little t trauma is like what is significantly life altering to one person could be like a dent in the side of your car door to another person. Okay.
Yeah.
How we experience trauma, it doesn't really matter if it's little t or big T trauma. If it fundamentally impacts you, it it can be life shaking and life altering and truly, you know, once again, be pervasive, right?
Absolutely. Your brain literally doesn't even know the difference, you know, or it'll literally secrete the same chemical response, whether it's big T, little t, it's going to feel in people's bodies unique to who they are, but it's going to feel the same. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's it really depends on the person, you know, and I think that's the interesting thing about psychology or social work is like we are all very individual beings, and so, you know, it's really important just to honor for you what impact a certain event has for you, right? Losing I think we've talked about this before. Losing a best girlfriend or breaking up with a partner, like a significant life partner, somebody you thought you might marry, somebody you thought would be your friend for life, like that's traumatic. It can have traumatic effects on you. It can feel like you've lost a limb, okay? And I don't want to downplay actually physically losing limbs, but I'm saying that all of those things depends on the person of how you function, how you understand, how you make sense of an event, how you can continue on, you know, living average daily life. And if you can continue on, you know,
exactly.
yeah, it's interesting. And then like, you know, I don't know, have like what do you think about kind of that differentiation? Because you're exactly right, right? They feel the same in the body or can feel the same in the body.
I think exactly what you said. I agree with everything. Like, to echo, especially the fact that you should honor it, right? It doesn't matter if it's you know, got a really icky text message and that was the thing that really, you know, like gave you the permission to stay at home. See, I don't even see it as a bad thing. I literally can't even bring myself, because that's how wide my range of permission is for myself, where I'm like, I honor it all, like whether I'm triggered in a big trauma way or a small trauma or a little trauma way. I think we should all honor that process, and we should also all honor someone else's process and not just assume like what's a dent in your car isn't a catastrophe for another person, and that we should have, you know, the range and explore the range to you know, especially as people with sensitive nervous systems and like heightened sensitivity, to know like, hey, even though that person might have just gotten a rejection letter that made them feel the same way that I felt when XYZ happened, instead of like throwing shade, I can create space and create room and mimic the same safety I would want for that person if I'm in relation with them, you know, or I can create it for myself, you know. So
Honestly, that is a really important key, because like even, I mean, even not even like throwing shade, but like, oh, I've been in that situation before, and the truth is, no, you have not, right? Even if you've been in a similar situation, because you don't know what impact that has on them. Like, great, like even grief, we all experience differently. Like, yes, there's fundamental pieces of grief, but just telling somebody like, I know what you're feeling, well, like relationships themselves are complicated, which means a loss of a relationship is just as complicated. You know, and then there's that self-judgment that we do of, well, everyone has to lose this at a point in time, or everyone has to experience rejection, and we can fuck up our own selves by telling us like we I shouldn't feel this way because XYZ. We
Yeah.
can our own selves up and re-traumatize ourselves from that.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so happy that you brought that up, because I think that's why that gentle approach and that gentle lens is so important to kind of view this, regardless if you're looking at big T or little t, looking at it through these like lenses, like gives us that space to just explore more range. Like, I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to beat someone else up, because I know that the 7 generations of intergenerational trauma I dredged through, they probably have. And so wherever they are, like, there's respect there, like, we as Indigenous Black and brown people, we can't be part of that active shaming of our own. Like, we've done that too long. We've already silenced one another. We've silenced ourselves. We've literally been steeped in a culture of silencing, and it's important that we say no more and then activate that in our, like, social spheres, in our mental spheres, in our emotional spheres, so that we can embody that. So I'm so happy that you brought that up.
For sure. And oh yeah, I love that. It's just so like, and we can just, even if we can look at how we treat others, I want to say a lot of the people that are listening to this might be that the empath, or have empath tendencies, or just be able to understand somewhat of other people's emotions. And if we could treat ourselves with the same compassion that we treated others, usually that would be, the game would be changed. Like,
the empath manifesto. Start treating yourself. Listen, that's the praxis for Lavenglow and for Intrepid Bodies. You must treat yourself the way you lovingly treat others. And I think that that's important. Major key. Hashtag.
Yes. And even like, even though like, even with big T and little T trauma, it's like there's secondary trauma, right? Like,
Yes.
and I just want to touch on this briefly, like especially helping professions, like if you're an EMT, if you're a firefighter, if you're a doctor, a paramedic, a trauma surgeon, or a therapist. Like, I want to say even like teachers, that if you are hearing traumatic events from somebody else often and in extreme detail, or visually seeing trauma a lot, that can also have, once again, the same effects in the body, and can set off that fight or flight response, can really get to us. People who, if you share a home with a war veteran, right, and they have bouts of PTSD, like their PTSD can actually traumatize you. Okay. So just to know, like trauma can come from all different types of events and trigger and just things. And so what we typically might think of as trauma, a lot of us might downplay other things that are actually quite traumatic. So once again, we're talking about intergenerational trauma, but then also your own personal trauma, right?
Exactly.
You've experienced. But know that if your grandmother went through something that did not appear to be trauma, she might not have looked at it as trauma, and yet it might have had an effect on her physical being, which then is also in you, right?
Yeah, the negative affect is like one of the biggest things that I think even I've seen in my studies, is like, even if the ancestor, the family member didn't see it as trauma, like the body's affect still senses, and again still secretes that same chemical, affect. And so you experience it, they experience it, which travels just as you told us earlier. So yeah, I think that that's so interesting, and one of the most interesting parts of all this, that it's like, even just the prolonged exposure, right, of like, even I've been in positions where I've taught special education, and just being in situations and hearing stories, or knowing what certain students go home to, I'm just like, oh wow, like this isn't one of those things where you can just leave work at work. It's like, wow, no, this is triggering me. So important. That I'm so happy you talked about that secondhand trauma as well.
it is an art to dive into somebody else's trauma and be able to not have it traumatize you, you know, and all helping professions really need to work. There's a little bit of detachment that has to happen for your safety, for your personal, spiritual, emotional safety, as well as like compartmentalizing that really does have to happen for you to be okay and not take on their trauma.
Yep.
And you know, and just like an example of like because we've mentioned fight or flight. I will actually be having like a YouTube video on this because it's its own topic. It's its own like it's its own category that I think really needs to be addressed, right? Like fight or flight. When you're in fight or flight, your body excretes cortisol, which, like you said, it's in high doses and prolonged. Cortisol is actually a toxin, a blood toxin, and it makes our bodies work so much harder than it needs to when and the thing is, stuff like the negative self-talk, stuff like, you know, things that we wouldn't expect, like set that off. Okay, so like if you go and see like a scary movie, for example, and you're like comfortable in your home, like you got your popcorn on your lap, you're like ready for this movie, and you're fine. Like you logically know I am physically safe in my home at this time. Yeah. But when the saw turns on, right, and you freak out and like spill the popcorn everywhere, you're sweating, you're like, why am I sweating? And your heart's beating faster. Like that's literally this is affecting you on a cellular level, right? This fear stimuli is really getting to you and having effects on your nervous system, you know? Okay. And that's why PTSD, it's like even though it's just, you know, a lot of people can downplay PTSD, but really it's like you're right there, right as it happened, all over again, experiencing it, and your body's re-experiencing it. Your body's closing up and clamping up just like it did in the actual event that was traumatizing to you, you know? And that means that scary movies, so stuff like negative self-talk, stuff like stopping short in traffic, like all these things today have that effect on us, like have that, like put us in fight or flight mode. So yeah, it's it's really important to just be aware of that. And then also, like I was thinking, like if you're working with these kids, you know, or if you're working with a traumatic experience, and then you think, well, what happens if I experience this, right? You're kind of putting yourself through this unnecessary, something that hasn't happened,
like a trauma scenario that you literally haven't experienced, but you will walk, like you said, walk yourself the whole way through. Yeah,
and has the same effects on the body as if you literally lived through it, right? It's so it's just something to be aware of, you know, just that all these things really do impact us. So what we take in definitely has an impact on, you know, our mind, our spirit, our physical health.
Yeah. And I'm so happy that you talked about the neurophysiological effect, right? Like just how powerful the mind is, right? And how powerful our thoughts can be. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we can like create awareness around having this like heightened and sensitive nervous system. Look at my family turning on the lights. Hey. Yo, but okay, my question was, how can we create awareness around having such a like heightened and sensitive nervous system? So how can we like find support if we know that we've collectively experienced trauma, we're like doing the work, we're getting curious, we're in community? What are some specific kind of like steps or things that we can kind of explore or do?
For sure. Well, I want to say like all this, that the key word in there is awareness, right? Is if you cannot see the dirt, you cannot clean it. So that's like, I love that analogy, because it's like we have to understand that there's stuff that we might not be able to see. And yet, if we have awareness that there is an issue around a certain topic, we might be able to pinpoint without maybe knowing its true origin, because let's face it, like some of us will never know the true horrors and true trauma that our ancestors lived through, that we're still working through our bodies today. And still, we can see our own habits that might be maladaptive. We can see our own behaviors that might shine light on some beliefs that we need to work on. And for me, honestly, everything really does go back to beliefs.
Yep.
What you believe is what is created. Okay. And you mentioned epigenetics earlier, and I'm not going to get into that here. We might go into that another
another time,
because it really does give us that blueprint that our beliefs really have a strong impact on what we're creating and co-creating with the universe in our daily lives. Okay. And so awareness, once we have awareness that we have certain issues and certain hang-ups maybe that we can work on, we're able to dive deep into those. And in that, I will always suggest that everybody go to therapy, even if you don't have a specific trauma in your personal life, even if you don't have what you think is a diagnosis. If you can get it, if you can have it on insurance, or you can figure out how to get that support, I am all for therapy. And caveat to this is that just like there are bad nail artists and techs, bad teachers out there, bad lawyers, bad doctors, do your research, check in with your intuition, meet a couple if you have to. There are bad therapists.
Do the interviews. I am like, do your Googles, do your interviews, because even before I found my therapist, I went through four of them before I found the one whom I fell in love with. So yeah, do your research.
It's hard because especially if you know that you're in like a dire straits of your life and struggling, it's hard because you barely have enough energy to call up on a phone sometimes that one therapist. And then it's like kind of feeling defeated when you don't find them right away. But know that you might not find them right away, and that is also normal. And that the therapeutic alliance and relationship is so key in you actually getting the help you need, in you really desiring to be vulnerable with an individual to do the work that you need to do. Okay, because if you're not willing to be vulnerable and you're not willing to actually share the shit that you need to get out, you're not doing anything. And it's like you're just wasting your time, you're wasting theirs, and you're probably wasting money and services. So find somebody who resonates. And along those lines, like that is why I actually started like Lavenglow and do healing packages, because I saw a need to step out of, I was a therapist, a mental health therapist. I saw a need to step out of the system. And so I'm currently not completely aligned with the term coaching. I think we've talked about this, but I do like healing packages and healing services where I work one-on-one with people, and it's like it's the relationship and the person knowing their stuff and knowing tools to share with you that is going to help you. And it's a trial and error. It's okay, what tools work for me, because this tool might not, and then I need to try another one. It's your own willingness to try different tools in the first place that's going to help you. And when you're sad, are you going to reach for a tool, or are you going to reach for the cookies or the weed or the this or that, like what do you do typically when you're upset? And are you going to go back to the old ways that weren't helping you in the long run? Or do you go to new tools that might be harder to use and integrate, but long term, they're going to be beneficial,
Exactly.
That's the healing's the inside job. It really is.
Yep. And I think once you get to even that question, once you start to question, like, are my behaviors, my beliefs, my triggers, are they serving me? Like, that is step one, you know? And so when you're on the ground level, I want to speak to that. Like, if you're on the ground level doing the work to find a therapist, doing the work to find an energy worker, doing the work to find a practitioner, do it earnestly, do it clearly. Don't do it as a secondhand thing. Do it with focus. Understand that you're doing it with like the hands of many generations who have been waiting to be healed behind you and with you, you know? And yeah, have that discernment. Know that, like, honestly, and I will speak to this is very personal. Like, I remember one of my first Reiki attunements being with someone who was totally out of alignment. And because of that, that encouraged me to become more learned about my subtle body, my energy body, all the different compartments, all of the different chakra systems. And so with that curiosity, it's just like, I implore people to just search and to just, again, get really curious about and do it earnestly. Like, if you are looking for somebody to help you do this work, there are people there, and we just have to treat it like a fun game.
Yes. Give me 1 second. My puppy messed up my setup.
That's all right. We love puppets.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that there's a lot of different modalities that can help people. I don't think therapy is the end all be all, but I know in my own healing journey, one of my first like healing, just major healing treatments was going to therapy myself, you know, and this is me as I'm being a therapist. Several therapists, a good therapist should have their own therapy at least at some point, okay? Because we need to be able to work out, you know, what we're dealing with other people as well as our own stuff, right? Yep. So yeah, that was a key in the beginning of my healing journey. And I think that, you know, there's so many different modalities and so many different types of healing. I was just talking with girlfriends about this, about, you know, there's Reiki, there's acupuncture, there's, you know, there's, chiropractor work. There's this new emotional polarity technique, which uses, I believe it's magnets actually, to like go through the body and pull out different energies. There's just
about that, and it's so fascinating. That is
I mean, tapping, right? Tapping, EFT is emotional freedom technique, and it's a type of meditation, essentially, I want to say. Mindfulness. There's just so many different tools and so many different types of practitioners. I think finding what aligns with you can be so significant in your healing journey. And it might be trying different elements to see what does vibe, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there are so many people too. I'm so happy that you talked about the fact that there are so many tools, and that there are so many practitioners. And I think that also, to speak to that, people are becoming really well versed in and of themselves, you know? So for somebody who is, you know, who maybe does have a therapist, for somebody who maybe does have a spiritual coach and is working with an accountability partner, what would you say for them? How could they hone the story or like the knowledge of the walk of their ancestors and the complexity of their ancestors? How can they hold that, and how can they hone that?
So I love that. I think that it's, once again, I just come back to, we're in such a time of mass awakening right now. And I think that just naturally we're being called to hone into the gifts of our ancestors, the gifts that come with that hypersensitivity, that high sensitivity, right? That we are able to tap into when you can tap into the tools, when you can use, like, understand the beliefs behind what you're thinking, when you can understand like why and where you're avoiding, like different stuff like that, when you get the meat of it, you're able to hone that sensitivity into heightened intuition, and less so like kind of quiet down the anxiety of it, if that makes sense. you know, I think on one spectrum is high, like the high priestess, the high intuition, and on the other spectrum it's like the nine of swords. It's like anxiety, you
Yeah.
know. And a lot of us don't know the difference, or at first we can't understand the difference between our intuition and our anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And to listen to that and understand and to partition out, I think takes a lot of shadow work and takes a lot of, you know, belief work, to do that. So yeah, but I think that we're in an age where we're really wanting to connect, okay, to our ancestors. We're talking to the elders in our life that are alive to get the stories of that we can of our ancestors. We're more inquisitive about our ancestors. We're doing more veneration. We're sharing their stories. We are, you know, we're just learning more, you know. I sat down one time when I went back to New Orleans to be with my dad a while back. I sat down and just asked him all about his childhood and asked him what I could about his mom and what he knew about her growing up, you know. And he was just like, wow, I never even thought to ask some of these of her, you know. And the thing is, when some of us don't have the older generation anymore. Some of us, you know, my mom was like, she was like a walking encyclopedia, and she actually loved doing like family tree work and had all the knowledge. So she had actually written a dissertation when she was in college, or I guess it was like a senior thesis, and it was all about, like, I want to say maybe 8 or 9 generations back, about some of the family that we have. And so, you know, I finally found that when I went back to New Orleans last time and was able to dive into that a couple months ago.
That's powerful.
It was very powerful. It was wild being able to like read these accounts um, of my ancestors, you know, and learn maybe some hard truths and some real stuff about what they went through and who they were, you know. And it just connected me. But on top of that, there's a bunch of meditation. Like meditation, I know it can be so laissez-faire, it can get a bad rap, but meditating and just connecting with your spirit guides, your angels, and your ancestors can really put us in that space, you know. Yeah, I know you have experience on this. And
Yeah, and I just think like what you're saying is so beautiful, like just the work and being really curious, like, you know, the nerve and the beauty, the audacity that your mom had to go back 9 generations, right? And write a dissertation to be like, you will publish my family's history, okay? Like, and I feel like that's the gusto that we have. And I think that that's a tool. I think that that's something that we need to explore and get really curious about, is like, okay, how can I reframe? How can I look at the walk and the journey and the paths that my people walked, as different and as diverse and as complex as they were? How can I see the richness and how can I see the gems in their story? And so one of the, you know, premier OG ways of shadow work is journaling. And so journaling, actually writing down your like family's like tree, you know. And I remember one practice in my culture is like, we're an oratory culture. We don't write down anything, we just tell things via story. And so one practice is like, once a child, it's like an initiation, right? Like once a child gets to a certain age, they are going to be learned and they are going to practice all of the names of their ancestors 40, 30 generations back, you know. And people like will test you on it. You'll wake up first thing in the morning and they'll be like, say it, you know. And it was a discipline, it was something that was ingrained in us because that was part of who we were. And as I got older, I recognized like some of these histories are really complex. Some of these people were experiencing profound illness, profound health issues. And when I realized and understand those, I like understand who they were and how they presented through the lens of whether or not they had those tools, then I'm offered an opportunity to like rewrite their narrative. I'm offered to bring them into a lineage of like, who would maybe grandmother be if she had access to a therapist, or if she had a midwife or a doula serving her? You know, how would she have connected with my mother differently, and thus maybe change the connection that I have with my mom, and thus have, you know, it ripples, and it can be so profound. But it takes just one person. I will say it takes one person being brave enough to be like, you know, I will go see my therapist. I'm going to go get Reiki. I'm going to go meditate. And at the same time, I'm going to convene with my ancestors to rightfully write their history as I know it.
Because they're supporting us in this work. Like, they're so proud of us, honestly. I think we don't give us, I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough props for how difficult, in depth, and grueling this work can be, and the work that we've done thus far. Because when you were talking about that, you know, it reminded me of this other piece of it, right? That I talked about trauma traveling 3 generations, and I even mentioned that if it's not healed, it'll continue. But there's almost a piece of like, well, why is that? And what is it that ingrains us into these, along with the biology? It's the trauma behaviors. You know, trauma comes with certain triggers. If you have ever experienced trauma, you know that there's things you might avoid. There's triggers that a smell can just remind you of a person, place, and thing. And just like it can help you heal, okay, you can train a scent to be a peaceful, calming experience. Just like that, a scent can also bring you straight back into trauma and straight back into a memory that was very discouraged, like just destructive for you. So the trauma behaviors, right? Things that we do to avoid getting re-traumatized, things we do to avoid certain people, places, and things that remind us of our trauma, behaviors that we do in efforts to protect ourselves, but also can close us off to things that are actually healthy for ourselves, actually nourishing to our souls, right? And then trauma beliefs, because along with behaviors, we get beliefs, or along with beliefs, we get behaviors. It's kind of like a cycle, okay?
Yeah.
And you know, when you mention that narrative, right? Rewriting a narrative is so helpful. Acknowledging what narrative is there, because even when you talk about journaling, we can journal about our own parents, our own experiences with them, our own experiences in life. How did I react when when so-and-so said this, and it triggered me? I know it did. I got upset, but what were the steps? What was I telling myself? What were the thoughts? What was I protecting myself from, right? Because anger is generally fear, right? If anger is a secondary emotion, so it's covering up fear, it's covering up upset, it's covering up sadness, right? But in that anger is it's a fight or flight response, right? Anger is fight. You know, sometimes we're gonna stand up for ourselves, and we're gonna come.
Show me that other side of the pendulum.
One of them's running, and one of them is fighting, and okay, so I fought for myself. So there was a reason I fought for myself. Why did I feel the need to fight for myself? What did I feel like was being attacked, right? Often enough, when somebody insults us, when somebody says, oh, you're a bad mom, right? Well, I'm a fight over that, like, because I don't, but what does that come up against? Do we believe in some ways that we might be dropping the ball? Well, I'll tell you, usually moms do, just because of mom guilt.
Yeah, and there's that too. Exactly. It's always compounded. We didn't even talk about compounded trauma, but that's one there, you know?
Like literally, you can be the best mom in the world and still not feel enough. You know, you're doing enough for yourself, for your kids, for everyone around you. And so, you know, we feel slighted, or our emotions are attacked, our sense of character is attacked, and we want to come to blows, or, you know. So it's just interesting, because when we talk about like those trauma behaviors, I like to look at like, unfortunately, in the Black community, we know there's a a lot of like single moms, right? Generation after generation after generation. And I look at this example and say, if grandmother who ended up being a single mom, you know, had to have the narrative because cognitive dissonance and because of being independent and strong woman, right? That unfortunate strong Black woman kind of thought process that we had to adopt to survive. If grandma, single Black woman, says, I can do this on my own, I don't need no man and you don't need no man, we're good, baby, we got this, we're okay. She had to say that, right? But if that's the belief, is we don't need no man and all men are shit, all men are dogs, all men blah blah blah, right? Then that's the belief I've set up now for my daughter and that I'm holding. So not only is it what I'm telling myself and ingrained in my body and in my blood, right, of maybe having the hurt and pissness and sadness of that man leaving me.
Yeah.
Okay, because that has set off my fight or flight of how am I going to do this by myself?
Exactly.
Now, I transfer that belief, and you know, my daughter also was groomed in that body, but I transfer that belief to my daughter of you don't need a man to make you happy, you're an independent young woman, blah 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 blah. Then she ends up projecting this belief onto men of I don't need a man and you're just gonna wrong me and you're just gonna leave. And we can often have behaviors like, you know, we can say, oh, you're cheating, right? And just goad our spouse into, I know you're cheating, I know you're cheating, I know you're cheating. Eventually, maybe even not that it's our fault, but drawing them either into cheating, you know, pushing them into that place, or pushing them away because you're so tired of not being trusted, right? And once again, now we create that cycle for the next generation, and it kind of just goes and goes and tumbles. You know, it's what are the narratives we tell ourselves, right? What are the beliefs, and how do we perpetuate that? What are the beliefs that your family held, whether spoken or not spoken?
You know? And I think that's so key too. Sorry, keep going.
No, yeah, it just we don't share the downfalls outside of the family. Like that's a belief, right? And then that means, okay, keep all your trauma in. Don't go to a therapist, don't tell your friends, don't tell this, that, and the other. You keep
what happens in this house stays in this house. What happens in this family stays in this family. All these like toxic adages that have us bottling everything up, you know?
Which can be a cover and a front oftentimes for physical abuse if you end up in that unfortunate scenario in an interpersonal relationship, right? Like all these things that our intention is to protect, right? It's to say, I want you to be a strong individual, I want you to be self-reliant, I want you to, you know, look good to the outside world, I want you to present well, I want all these things for you. But yet these beliefs that we've passed down to give a child that, to coax a child in that way, have also put them in a box that now they're like limiting beliefs, you know? And I mean, we can talk about how many, and I say single moms, right? Dads and grandfathers will pass down the men ain't shit thing because they don't want their daughters to, you know?
Like you'll have one generation of men telling one generation of women, well, like a girl, right, who comes from women who are also saying that, telling her that men ain't shit. And granted, I will say, we know what the patriarchy is. We know what's up, right? We know that here, that it's like there are legitimate men who legitimately ain't shit. And I will never cap for anybody who really ain't shit. But again, we're talking about narratives that create beliefs. And it's like these narratives, how much of our reality do they serve? Like how much of our truth do they hold, you know? So I'm glad that you brought that one up, because the men ain't shit one is so, it's something I think we have all heard on to some level. And it's like,
talk with your girlfriends about, just in casual conversation, just like, yeah, girl, there ain't no good men left. And while, you know, and it's so normalized for us, I'll say almost like diet culture, but that's a whole nother story. So, you keep with your girlfriends about like men ain't shit, and oh, I know I don't look good, I need to lose weight, or I need to da da da. And it's like, what are we setting up for ourselves? Now we've told ourselves we don't look good, like, and we're never going to find a man because there's no good men out there to find, and like, this is the narrative, like, in terms of like trying to manifest, because if you are a person who desires a male as a partner, these are not good circumstances to work under, right?
Like, this is limiting beliefs, like truly limiting beliefs.
They're very limited, like, boxes and parameters to work within. If there are no good men, we are all messed up. Like,
like, girl, I'm gonna have to call you back. Like, I need a shadow work on that.
It's just, and it can be a hard thing to break, but it's like, and we can also be very resistant to it. But the thing is, if our bodies feel like that is the truth, it also means that as open as we think we are to finding love, we are not. We are closed off as hell, because if you truly think there's no good men out there, it means that you're gonna be putting up roadblocks to any potential that is an actual potential. And and I'll say it again, I really believe what is for you will not miss you. I found my fiance and stayed very jaded for a long time, even after finding him about the male species. But if you're aware of it, right, it's a lot easier to kind of heal and do work around that. And then also set up your boundaries, right? Because yeah, you're right, there are some not shit men, just like there are some not shit women, trans folks, queer, like whatever, right? There are just people out there that are not shit. And that is true. And it doesn't mean that we have to pull them in via our vibration to us.
How can we do that? What do we do so that when we see the parts of people that we don't want to invite into our field, that we don't want to participate and play in this world, how can we create some screenings so that doesn't come into our world?
Yeah, we set boundaries. We say no.
We just team boundaries.
We just say no. I would not like to go out on a date with you.
No, Charlie. No.
I like to go to brunch. Like, if and sometimes it's unavoidable. And maybe you're a friend of a friend, and your friend always invites somebody that your spirit doesn't resonate with. Maybe that's talking to your friend to say, hey, just give me a heads up if so-and-so is going to be there. You definitely can make a choice to say I am or I'm not going to be there, but maybe I'll spiritually protect myself and wear a couple more crystals if so-and-so is going to be there. Maybe maybe I'm extra careful to take my salt bath after I hang out with everybody. Or maybe I just know if I'm in a certain mental state where I need my inner girl circle or my inner person circle where I feel comfortable and safe, then I'll go out. But if I'm not tip top, if my cup is not full, it's gonna have to be a no for me for going out. Now I know going out's a whole different thing these days.
I mean, at this point, I'm like, where is out? Out is here, where I've been in my backyard all evening.
A conversation with your girls, you know what I mean? So,
this is it.
It totally is what it is, but there's still an essence of like, we need to protect our energy. And you mentioned this earlier, like how can we create more awareness around the heightened sensitivity, right? And I think going back to that is every interaction, every social interaction, whether that be online, whether that be through Zoom, whether that be in person, is an energetic exchange. And you always, well, theoretically, you should have, you should be able to create boundaries around that and home court advantage of what you want in your energy space. And by that I mean maybe that looks like unfollowing certain people on social media, or never going to your search or explore page on your social media because you don't know what will pop up. Maybe it means muting certain friends that you don't want to deal with, but you don't want to.
I will tell you, to that muting, okay, so my Twitter, when I was going through a really intense, the universe is so beautiful. When I was going through a really intense, like, dredging through my own cleansing, I was on social media, and one day, all of a sudden, my Twitter timeline stopped loading. Like, I could not see tweets for, 3 weeks straight, Gabby. And so, like, the universe was muting people for me. It was like, listen, you need to protect your mental space.
Pause on that. That's real.
So I love that. That's excellent advice. That's like one of my favorite pieces of advice.
Yeah, everything's an energetic exchange. So if you can choose, and I know some places people can't at work, for example, you can't always choose family. You can't choose who your family is, but often enough you can choose to limit interactions with them or with certain people, and you have to for your spiritual well-being. You have to. I'm not saying it's easy, but your spirit's going to thank you when you spend a lot less time with Aunt so-and-so who always criticizes your fashion, your weight, and your choice in partners in life, you know?
Auntie, you can stay where you are, okay? I love you, but no. I love you. No.
I know that that's an interesting cultural piece, you know, and some people aren't ready to step out of the cultural binds that are. But I do think our generation as a whole is making a lot more strides to step out of those cultural binds. I do, even if this is respectful or culture, does not mean you have to hug every uncle that comes into the house, and maybe we shouldn't be making our children do that either.
Come on, because this is about consent. This is about boundaries. This is about what my body wants to do, what my mind wants to do. And it's like, you have to honor that. You have to honor just like how we talked about earlier, you have to honor how you're going to process those triggers, but you also got to honor when those gifts come online and like your psychic senses are telling you we know better. You got to follow that. You got to follow that. And it starts with children, you know, how it's just our whole culture, right? It's like we talked about it being a culture of oppression. It starts with when we're younger, how we have to say hi to everyone. We have to be polite. We have to be nice. And it's like, like if we could put a mic to our nervous systems, how would that have made us feel as children, right? And so I think that
don't have to hug everyone that comes through the door. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So
yeah, I think even the fact that we're training our children differently, at least so many of us are, the fact that we're seeing that need for consent and personal safety over respect of whoever, right? You know, and going back to these beliefs once again, the collective family beliefs, the implicit and explicit family beliefs that you hold, you know, that like, yes, these are beliefs you've held, these are beliefs that have been passed down generation after generation after generation maybe, but one, are they serving me? And two, knowing that yes, these are our beliefs, these are the way we function in life, but they're not necessarily based on truth. They're not based on fact, and it doesn't mean that I can't question what is this serving me. Once again, is this serving me? And who I am and where I am today, right? Is this serving my highest and greatest good? And if the answer is no, well, and there you go.
Get to work and you start creating those emotional boundaries, those mental boundaries. You, like you said, we haven't, but I think one thing that we could talk about too is just like identifying those safe spaces, right? So like if your family isn't the first people that you call when you're feeling triggered, like who are those people, right? And maybe it's not even when you're feeling triggered, but like when you need that sense of safety. Who are those people? Where are those spaces? Is it a park? Is it your backyard? Is it in your tub? Identify what that safe space is and carve out like time to dedicate to it. If it's your tribe, call them, be proactive. If you're not satiated with what's happening with one social circle and you don't feel as though one space is safe, right? Like family dynamic, for example, then be proactive about the spaces that do make you feel safe, because those are the people that you're leaning on. Those are the spaces that hold you up. Those are the things, if your backyard is the place you love to hang out, beautify it, right? Like make it look gorgeous. Like buy some new backyard furniture.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, it's funny because I even think that like teens are kind of notorious for this, right? Is like you gravitate towards your friends versus towards your parentals at that age and at that time period, because that feels safer for you. You feel more understood. You feel like, oh, I'm not going to get in trouble, like da da da, but I feel understood. And even then, it's just like maybe your intuition isn't always perfect about who to trust in that scenario,
Yeah.
but that I think makes a call to even say like we'll gravitate towards certain people and certain like minds at different points in our lives. And just checking in with your intuition once again. Does this feel safe, and does this feel nurturing? Can I be my most authentic self here? And identifying, okay, there's people I still love, and maybe I can't be my full authentic self with them. Like, you have different faces at work, you have different faces maybe with your parents, and it doesn't mean that it's not authentically you, but maybe you're not going to be all of you with this person, and that's okay. And honestly, it's probably better to be able to identify, okay, this is a safe space. Like, I have a really great relationship with my dad. It's growing every day, but there's still things I know about my emotional body and my emotional self that I have learned to not go straight to my father with, because his sense of sensitivity, his sense of nurturing is not going to be what I need. Mm-hmm. And to go to him with certain emotional things when I am raw is actually going to do more harm than good for me. And so that is something I've learned about myself, about the spaces that we are in. And I'm able to make judgment calls. Sometimes I might decide to be more vulnerable with him if I'm feeling safe enough to do so, but I'm going to make sure that I have my safety net and I'm safe and I'm good over here before jumping into territory that might be less emotionally stable or safe, right? And I think that nuance,
it is. Yeah, it is. It's super nuanced, and it is something that I think that's an intergenerational gift, right? Like when you do the work and you recognize like, okay, I'm aware, I have a self-awareness, I've done the work, I recognize, like I've reframed the stories, then you can go into these places and you can establish boundaries that actually help cultivate space for relationships to begin to serve you, right? Like you go to person A for A, and like they are serving you, so you're no longer traumatized by that person or that interaction or that energy exchange. And so I'm always invested in that reframe. I'm always invested in like, okay, when we do the forgiveness in our nervous system, what comes next? Because we're creators, right? Like our bodies are like, okay, what's the next impulse? And so the next impulse is always to connect, because we're human. Like we want to connect, we want love, we want nourishment, and we want to be recognized and validated in our relationships. So it's about creating the right lenses and also creating the right boundaries so that those lenses can be seen all the way through, those relationships can be seen all the way through, and they can actually serve us, and we're like, oh my God, I'm empowered, I'm strengthened by like. And I think like the relationship with our fathers is such a beautiful example, because I've had to do that reframing work recently, and it's just that where I'm like, I actually am at a place where I can see my father supporting me, and I never thought that was possible before. And so, but it's because I've done the work to, like you said, not expect specific things or expect like an emotional response from specific things, and I'll maybe go to my sisters about that, or I'll go to my friends about that, and so my nervous system is all nourished. So by the time I tell him, I'm not waiting for it. There's no like hole in my energy body like, hey, share this. And so it creates a more like smoother energy exchange, like you said, and also like we're approaching relationships from a more holistic and healed perspective, to where relating can actually happen.
Yes, that part, right? Because when I don't look for you to fill me up, I can fill myself up and then go to you. Then I'm not feeling depleted when you can't give me what I hope that you can give me. Because I can't control you, I can only control me, right? That part. That was like,
That talk. Yes, girl. Yeah, I tweeted this recently where I said, what are two cups, two full cups, an overflow? And so that's how I feel, is like when we do this work, when we dredge through the intergenerational trauma, when we activate ourselves, we turn on our gifts, we are nourished by our community, we are spiritually refined through practitioner work, when we're seeing our therapists, where we're reestablishing our relationships, we're no longer a victim, we're no longer a traumatized person. You're a gift to this world. Like, you become an activated person, and you're still human. You're gonna make mistakes, and it's fine. But at the same time, I think getting to that place of knowing what our limiting beliefs are, knowing what our limiting just kind of like our the narratives that create frameworks that don't work, when we create awareness around those, I just love, like, my biggest takeaway from this conversation is that, like, we have the power, like, we wield the sword to do this work. So
yes, like honestly, I think I just said that recently. It's just like we can be empowered in our lives instead of playing a victim in the role of our lives. And that's just such a beautiful thing. So, I mean, I know we're going to touch on this and probably get to this quickly next, but
yeah,
like in terms of like tools to
yep,
use, like
yeah,
that just came up when you made that mention. It was just like, yes, that's what I was going to say, is self-compassion with ourselves and being able to identify how filled our cup is or how low it is, and being able to fill up ourselves is so key in being able to show up, like, for others, and in a healthy way in our social relationships. Because
yeah,
also anybody with depression or anxiety knows, like, that depression and anxiety doesn't just affect you as a person, it affects your everyone around you, you know and it affects your relationships because you show up differently in your relationships when you are depressed, when you are highly anxious, um so yeah, self-compassion itself, definitely a tool to be aware of.
yeah. No, and I love that. I think self compassion too is how, because it takes a lot of vitality to do this work too. It takes a lot of like visceral energy to get up and do the things that are necessary. And so being gentle and being kind, I'm so happy that you brought that self-compassion piece, because once you do the forgiveness, it's like walking a very like tender, like
Yes.
flowing road. So I just think that that's so key. That's so
Yeah,
key.
for sure. For sure.
Be kind to yourselves.
Yes. What are some other tools that you found have helped you in your own, like healing generational trauma for yourself?
Yeah. I think so much of what we talked about today has been pivotal, right? Like just knowing and noting what limiting beliefs are running, how I'm supporting those limiting beliefs. But one of the main tools that I think has just been integral in all of this has been the work of reprogramming. So reprogramming my mind, my emotional body, reprogramming, and what that entails is like a lot of what we talked about today, right? Is like actually changing our frameworks, actually uprooting the old narratives and getting to the root of them. Because I see myself, and a lot of healers, I think, see themselves this way, as like a mad scientist, right? Being like, okay, what do these modalities have? Like, what part of the psyche are they touching on? Okay, how can I get to that part of the psyche? And so for me, reprogramming has been integral, because what it I think frees up for us is who we are. It allows us to identify who we are outside of the trauma, the implicit trauma, the reality of trauma, right? Because I don't think it serves us to act as though trauma didn't happen, or expect our healing journey to come out of our healing journey as like a totally new person. It's like you still are you. You're still the same person with the same nuances, with the same pieces of the story. However, reprogramming, huh?
You might feel like a new person though.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, if you're doing it, yeah, you're gonna feel like it for sure. And it's like also allowing the mind and the psyche and the subconscious catch up with the body, what the body is experiencing. Because what I notice, and what I even notice with some of my clients, right, is like they'll have an amazing yoga session, or they'll detox and they'll be on the path for a while, and their body's going to feel great, but there's literal cognitive dissonance. They're like, this can't be real. And so what they do is re-traumatize themselves, and they're putting their bodies in a state where they're experiencing or thinking a thought where they're like, this can't be real, and it puts their body in a state of fight or flight. And then all of that work is not for naught, but again, they're in a state where they're like, I thought I did this work, I thought I got to this place. And so what reprogramming kind of gives us a chance to do is to, again, like unhinge your mental hooks from the traumatic narratives, and connect to that part of you, like the inner child, that inner wisdom that's like, who am I when I'm not stopping myself? And who am I when when a limiting belief isn't at the forefront? Who am I when I want to create at my highest capability? Who am I when I think about what my childhood hobbies were and I follow through on those things? And so, yeah, reprogramming, and that's why I use the word and always say like getting curious, because that's that vibe of the inner child, like just being very playful and just digging and irrigating through your own mental to see that, yeah, there's this part of us that is full of light and full of love. You know, I hesitate to say light and love without an adage and an asterisk, but there is a part there is a part of us that is like light, and that is truly love, and this wants to create and wants to connect. And that is the part that I'm constantly in relationship with, and reprogramming allows us to be in relationship because we realize we're never separate from it. So
yeah, that reprogramming, oh my gosh, like, yeah, that's what I work with a lot with my clients on, is like identifying, first of all, because once again, seeing the dirt to clean it, identifying and shifting beliefs that are limiting. Because I truly personally believe like the beliefs are like the biggest part to that reprogramming, right? And then we have to get the body to follow and be in line. But like you said, we can do a lot of things for the body and forget that our minds, our subconscious minds, are still running the show. So really we fall back into those old habits. We fall back into old things if we don't really assess what are the beliefs underlying this habit. What are the beliefs that I'm telling myself on the daily, right?
yeah.
So, yeah, that's why like the awareness, like training and reprogramming those trauma behaviors, beliefs, you know, beliefs just stem to our feelings and stems to our behaviors themselves, and just kind of runs the show, honestly. So many aspects. So I definitely feel you on that.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have any other tools that you'd like to share for the listeners?
Yeah, you know, one tool that I think is so key, especially for Black and Indigenous peoples, is it sounds so simple, but stay with me, is rest. Honestly, like rest is so pivotal.
Yeah.
And I find like here's the thing, right? This is why our ancestors were not able to self-actualize, because they didn't have the time to slow down enough to think about themselves in this deep, like grueling way. You know, you have to get painfully honest with yourself, and to be able to do this, to be able to do the shadow work we're talking about, you need space to not, right? You need space to not be working, because that's a trauma behavior, is working so much that we're avoiding the actual inner work. Okay. Like, yeah, I can spend 12, 15 hours doing work for this corporation, but when I get home, now I have to busy myself with something else because I can't be alone with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That is an indication that you need to do the inner work. Okay. If you have high anxiety, that's an indication you need to do some work on your beliefs, and that you also need to rest. Your nervous system has been in survival mode for so long. Of course it's drained. Of course your adrenals are tired and burnt out. You need to chill out. So our ancestors were not able to rest, right? And that is why resting is a gift to them. Resting allows them to lay back and chill out a little bit, okay? And I'm not just talking about rest in terms of binge watching a Netflix show, because honestly, that's not really rest. That's zoning out, right? And you're not there. But rest is like napping is a rest, okay? Like, yes, maybe getting into one of your favorite shows for a little bit is a rest, but it's being aware, being conscious of how you are spending your time. If you are working on something, if you like painting or art, right? Listening to music, like all these things, if you're doing things mindfully that help you to relax, rejuvenate your inner being, right? That's rest. But often, like the Netflix, the binge watching can just be another form of going, and avoiding.
I was going to say, I mean, even some people say that Netflix can be a healthy distraction, but ultimately it's a distraction, right?
Distraction can be good. If you need, in the moment, you need to identify when you need distractions, and better that, honestly, than self-harming, okay? Always. But, and to maybe get you out your thoughts or like ruminating thoughts, negative thoughts, but there still needs to be awareness there.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, and knowing just that you're worthy of rest, right? Like you said, just that whole piece of our ancestors, the lives that they live, but also like how they communicate with us, bro, is when we're sleeping. Spirit does not find you.
Or in meditation.
Yeah, or in meditation, right? It's like that's when you are in that deep, like, oh, I see myself fully as like an eternal sovereign being. That's when they come to you, So they're proud of us. They never got the chance. And if you are interested in communicating with your ancestors and showing veneration, go to bed. Take a nap.
Yep, and use a dream journal. Have a journal next to you to record anything. Honestly, that's so that's, ancestors work tirelessly because they had no choice. If we are given that space, that's what we need to do, is rest, meditate, go outside in nature and connect. Okay, that's what I mean by rest often enough. And set boundaries. Okay, I know we touched on this, but setting boundaries to say, hey, no, I can't go out because I do need to rest tonight. I'm tired, setting boundaries when there is, when Black Death is running rampant on social media and everyone's talking about it. I'm not saying to completely disassociate, but sometimes your spirit needs to put down the phone, put down the social media, and not engage, and get in touch in a different way, okay? Because all that is it's hyping up your fight or flight. It's hyping up your sadness. And yes, we do need to feel those feelings, but sometimes it's time to pause and jump into our joy. Okay, because that's our resistance as well. Joy, rest, like living a healthy life without always being in fight or flight, that's also our resistance. Okay, so staying alive and being well to create generational wealth, to create the next generation that doesn't have this level of trauma in their body and bones and blood, that's our resistance. So setting boundaries is so key. I know we're all trying to go hard and fight for the causes and be there and show up for our people. And all of us have different missions, which I think we can tend to forget. all of our missions don't look the same. Somebody's mission is to, go and to protest, and somebody's is to share joy through their community, so that they can help uplift others and remind others that this life can be joyous, that we can get in touch with our ancestors, and that we can, venerate them by living a life of joy.
Yeah.
And just like the last one, I have a couple, but one of the last ones is right, when you rest, because it's so ingrained in us, whether by our parents, society, the grind culture is real. Capitalism is a heavy fixture on all of us, right? And it's almost like our productivity has equated to our worth. And now this is a mindset. It's a program to reprogram, number one. But number two, what comes up in that is guilt a lot of times for many of us. And I like to work on guilt reducing statements with my clients, because guilt can overwhelm you. It can take you down. It has the means of going into anxiety, going into an anxious state, and it's very low vibrational. Yep. Okay. Guilt is unhealthy when it's kept in the body too long. Okay. And so releasing that guilt and working with guilt reducing statements can do a lot for just like, hey, I need to rest. I'm tired and I need to rest. So what that looks like is basically just making a list for yourself. Okay. Specifically around rest, I have some statements I've made up that can look like, and let me say I've done this with victims of assault, okay? Because oftentimes victims hold, there's a lot of victim blaming and victims their own guilt around what's happened to them. And so this is a really good tool if you've experienced that type of trauma as well. But, one, it's necessary for me to take care of myself, right? All human beings need to rest. 3, all human beings need a break. 4, part of productivity is resting and regenerating. 5, I said no. Right? Simple. Simple to the point. I said no.
Period. As the kids would say.
Yes. 6, my spirit felt uncomfortable, and that was a sign for me to pull back, say no, and protect myself. 7, I'm allowed to protect myself at all costs, right? Simple just statements like, what can you tell yourself to validate? Like, yes, you did need a break. And yes, it's okay to take your mental health day. Yes, if it's not harming somebody else, any acts that you take to like protect your being, that's okay.
Do it. Yep.
Yeah. So those are some of my tools for, especially for, generation, our millennials, Generation Z, and doing some of that work when it comes to intergenerational trauma and reprogramming the body and mind,
Yeah. And I just think everything that you said, especially like reducing the guilt and like just the idea of decolonizing rest, like these are things that we're doing so that somatically we can feel better in our bodies and feel better about being alive, and it's just necessary work, it's necessary. People think when you say the work that it's like, all right, I gotta, figure out how I'm gonna get these appointments, but sometimes it is like taking a nap, sometimes it is affirming yourself. And I think that that's my favorite part of the work, because that's what, like you said, is the reprogramming. That's what rewrites the psyche, so that greater possibility of the fullness of one's own humanity, especially as Black folk, Indigenous folk, who are in the process of, in live action, watching, these systems that no longer serve us crumble. It's so important that we take extra care, and we're extra careful and mindful with our bodies and our nervous systems, the narratives, the stories we're telling ourselves, because not only are we all we got, but we are going to be what's left standing when all this is decimated, right? And so our creativity, our vitality, our joy, our juiciness, like, has to be at the forefront, because that's the world that we want to see, and that's the world that we want to create, you know. And that's one thing that's in the bio of Intrepid Bodies, is like, how do we do that? How do we no longer conform to what no longer serves us, and how do we create a world that we want to see? But it starts with ourselves first, you know. It starts with in here.
For sure. And I just want to reiterate, one more tool was what I mentioned earlier, was self-compassion. You know, sum up of everything you said: when we treat ourselves with kindness, when we can be mindful and practice mindfulness, and we can have like that understanding, like our health, our you know, our health, our spiritual health, our physical, our mental health, emotional, like that's what matters, you know. Yeah, and having common humanity, you know. If we don't do it for ourselves, if we don't keep ourselves well, if we
Yeah.
don't keep ourselves going, we're not able to show up for our fellow humans and to really, you know, create this new world that is going to serve us all. So
Yeah.
I agree.
What a beautiful way. Gabby, I would love for you to share with my listeners of Intrepid Bodies where they can find you, where they can follow you, and how they can just get into your work and what you
Yeah.
offer too.
Yes. So over on lavenglow.com, we have all our offerings from our shop, which has organic skincare and organic kind of spiritual cleansing items, from spiritual baths to sprays that kind of help you keep your aura clean and vibrations high. You can also find our healing packages. I offer tarot readings as spiritual tarot readings that kind of um, meld tarot readings and messages from spirit and your guides and your angels, as well as psychology, and how you can integrate these themes and these messages to really help you reprogram your beliefs and reprogram your body and integrate that healing work. And we also do healing packages that include mental health and mindset coaching, so that you can dive deep into whether that be you know, inner child healing, or healing this generational trauma that's coming up, healing depression, anxiety, what have you, and work one-on-one with me, do it through Zoom meetings. It's a really beautiful experience. I love this work. And what else do we have? We have our blog over there. And so our Instagram is lavenglow_organics. And over there, we just try to share, you know, motivational tools and tips as well. And we just started a YouTube channel that I am so excited about, because obviously I really love just being able to talk out a lot of these topics. And so many topics are so juicy and have so much meat to them that an Instagram caption can't encompass it all sometimes. So you can find a lot of healing tools, knowledge, tarot readings, and different things over there. We just posted about epigenetics, which I'm saying is the science behind the law of attraction. So we got a lot of cool videos and content coming up. And yeah, you guys just come on over. Love to have you.
Yes, absolutely. And for my listeners, I will be putting all the information in the info. So I will link Gabby's Instagram page, the website, and I'll even put a link to services, because I'm overdue for a tarot reading, actually. So I'm happy you mentioned it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Well, this conversation was just, I have no words, because I know that our guides and our ancestors have been grooming us to have this conversation for a while. And I'm so happy that it happened today and the way that it did. I just thank you for spending your time with me today. And I just appreciate your genius. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was a beautiful conversation. I just feel like all the energy is in me tingling when we talk about this. And it's just I think it's like another way to venerate the ancestors and honor them, and like they did so much for us to get us here. They survived, and that was a hard ass job, and here we are just glowing up, living in our purpose, trying to help our community and share these beautiful tools with our community. And I'm just so happy that it's accessible, and it's, yeah, it's just so bomb. So thank you so much for having me, because this is such a beautiful space and podcast that you've created, and I'm just so excited to be here, and hopefully you'll have me back.
I was literally, you took the words right out of my mouth. This is the first of many. And if you all would like to hear specific topics, especially as you explore Gabby's platform, if you would like to hear more topics, please do not hesitate to message me. And if you love the content we share today, please like and share and do all the things for Intrepid Bodies podcast. But this was episode 7 of talking about intergenerational trauma, how to activate your intergenerational gifts. And Hoda and Gabby are signing out. Y'all take care.